The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the marrow of her bones, and a voice that whispered of the eternal, silent peace of the snow. Lysandra no longer fought it. She had been fighting her entire life, fighting for a scrap of warmth, a morsel of food, a single glance that was not filled with contempt. Now, exhaustion was a heavier blanket than the blizzard, and she was so very tired of fighting. Her wolf, a frail and shimmering white spirit within her, was curled into a tight ball of misery. It hadn't been strong enough at her presentation, its fur the color of bleached bone, its eyes a startling, unnatural pink. An albino. A curse. That was what they had called her. Her own pack. Her own blood. The memory was a shard of ice lodged permanently in her heart, colder than the wind that tore at her thin tunic. She stumbled, her bare feet numb and useless against the frozen ground. The forest was a maze of skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the bruised purple sky. This was the edge of the Shadow Wolf territory, a place no sane wolf would tread. But Lysandra was not sane. She was broken. And broken things did not fear other broken things. Her mind, a traitorous vessel, drifted back to that day. The great hall of the Silver Moon Pack had been suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of pine and anticipation. She had stood on the dais, 17 years old, her white hair a stark beacon of her shame. Lord Valerius, her uncle and the pack's high counselor, had looked at her not with familial pride, but with a disgust so profound it had felt like a physical blow. "She is a flaw in our noble line," his voice had boomed, each word a hammer blow against her already fragile spirit. "An omen of weakness. Her wolf is a pale ghost, a mockery of the strength the moon goddess bestows upon us. No true alpha would have her. She is rejected. She is nothing." He had not been her fated mate, but as her guardian, his public rejection held the weight of a final judgment. The assembled pack had not protested. They had murmured in agreement, their eyes a mixture of pity and revulsion. The alpha she had secretly hoped might see past her appearance, a young, ambitious warrior named Rovan, had turned away, his expression one of pure disdain. That was the moment the ice had truly formed, encasing her heart in a prison of worthlessness. Her mother, Elindra, had died years ago, but her last words haunted Lysandra's waking moments and her dreams. "Be silent, my sweet girl. Endure. Your heart is your strength, even if they cannot see it. Do not let their cruelty extinguish your light." But the light had long since dwindled to a barely there ember, and she was so close to letting the wind snuff it out completely. A flicker of movement in the snow ahead dragged her back to the brutal present. It was dark, a stark slash of black against the endless white. Curiosity, a feeling she had thought long dead, stirred faintly within her. She forced her leaden feet forward, her breath pluming in front of her face in short, ragged bursts. It was a wolf, a massive wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of a starless midnight. It was sprawled in the snow, a dark pool of blood melting the pristine white around its flank. Its breathing was shallow, a faint rasp that was nearly lost in the howl of the wind. A deep gash, unnaturally black, and edged with a sickening silver sheen, marred its powerful shoulder. Silver. A poison fatal to their kind. Her first instinct, the one born of years of self-preservation and fear, screamed at her to run. This was a predator, a rogue, or worse. Getting involved was a death sentence. Her life was a miserable, pointless thing, but it was still hers. She should save it. She should turn and let the forest claim this fallen giant. But then, the wolf let out a low, pained whine. It was a sound of profound agony, of a great strength brought low. It was a sound Lysandra knew intimately. It was the sound of her own soul. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Your heart is your strength." Could she truly walk away and leave another creature to die alone in the cold? Could she become as callous as those who had tormented her? No, she could not. The decision settled over her with a strange sense of peace. If this was to be her end, then let her final act be one of kindness. Let her die trying to save something, rather than dying while running from everything. Summoning a reserve of strength she did not know she possessed, Lysandra grabbed the thick fur of the wolf's scruff. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Her weak omega form was no match for him, but she gritted her teeth, her muscles screaming in protest. She pulled. The wolf slid a few inches. "Come on," she grunted, her voice a raw whisper. "You are not dying here, not today." It was a torturous, agonizing journey. She dragged him foot by painful foot back toward the pathetic hovel she had found, a collapsed woodcutter's hut, barely more than a lean-to against a rock face. The wind fought her, the snow tried to bury them both, and her own body threatened to give out at any moment. But the steady, if faint warmth radiating from the giant wolf's body became her focus, a tiny spark to guard against the encroaching dark. By the time she managed to haul him into the relative shelter of the hut, she was trembling uncontrollably, her vision swimming with black spots. She collapsed beside him, her cheek pressed against his thick, dark fur. It smelled of pine, of ozone, and of a power so immense it made the air around him hum. She could not rest. Not yet. She crawled to the back of the hut where she kept her meager possessions, a flint, a small dented pot, and a few strips of cloth torn from her old bedding. With numb, clumsy fingers, she scraped together enough dry tinder to start a tiny, flickering fire. The light was pathetic, but it was a victory. She filled the pot with snow and set it near the flames. While it melted, she examined his wound. The gash was deep, and the flesh around it was necrotizing from the silver. He needed it cleaned. He needed a healer, a proper pack medic, not a broken omega with nothing but desperation. But she was all he had. When the water was warm, she soaked one of her precious strips of cloth and gently began to clean the wound. The wolf flinched in his unconscious state, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Shh," she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. "I am not going to hurt you. I am trying to help." As she worked, she began to talk. The words came hesitantly at first, then flowed like a river breaking through a dam of ice. She told him everything. She told him about her white fur and pink eyes, about the whispers and the stares. She told him about Lord Valerius and the rejection that had shattered her world. "They say I am a curse," she whispered, her tears falling onto his dark coat, freezing into tiny crystals. "That I am worthless, broken. And maybe they are right. I look at myself and I see nothing of value. My wolf is weak. I am weak. I have nothing to offer anyone." She confessed her loneliness, the soul-crushing weight of being utterly alone. She spoke of her mother's promise, a promise she felt she had failed to keep. Her light was almost gone. "But you," she said, stroking his massive head, "you are magnificent. So strong. Even lying here, near death, you radiate power. I wonder what it is like to be so sure of your place in the world, to be wanted, to be valued." She cleaned the wound as best she could, then tore the last of her cloth to bandage it tightly. There was nothing more she could do. She huddled against his immense form, sharing her meager body heat, and drifted into an exhausted, fretful sleep, her final, whispered confession lost to the wind. "I just didn't want you to have to die alone." Lysandra awoke to a sound that sent a spike of pure terror through her. Howls, not the wild, chaotic calls of rogues, but organized, powerful howls that spoke of discipline and a singular purpose. A search party. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They had come for the wolf. Or worse, they had come for her. Had someone from her old pack followed her, determined to finish the job of casting her out for good? She scrambled back, pressing herself against the cold rock wall of the hut. The giant wolf stirred beside the dying fire. He lifted his head, his ears twitching. A low, commanding growl rumbled in his chest, not directed at her, but at the sounds from outside. Then, the air in the small hut shifted. It grew thick, heavy, shimmering with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Light, brighter than the dawn, erupted from the wolf's form. Lysandra threw an arm over her eyes, blinded. It was the light of a shift, but more powerful than any she had ever witnessed. It was raw, primal creation. When the light subsided, the wolf was gone. In his place, lying on the dirt floor, was a man. He was naked, his body a tapestry of corded muscle and old scars, a testament to a life of battle. But it was his face that stole her breath. He had high cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, and black hair that fell across his brow. He was the most beautiful and terrifying man she had ever seen. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his movements stiff from the silver poisoning but still imbued with an undeniable grace. Then he opened his eyes. They were not the warm brown or amber of most wolves. They were a startling, piercing silver like twin pools of liquid moonlight. They fixed on her, and in their depths, she saw not disgust or pity, but a dawning, incredulous recognition. Before either of them could speak, the makeshift flap of the hut was torn aside. A man stood silhouetted against the morning light, flanked by two other warriors in imposing black leather armor. The man in the center was broad and stern, a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the man on the floor. "Your Majesty," he breathed, dropping instantly to one knee. The two guards followed suit without hesitation. Majesty? Lysandra's mind reeled. The king? The Shadow Wolf King? Theron? The ruler of the largest, most feared territory on the continent? The alpha of all alphas? It was impossible. He was a myth. A legend whispered about in terrified tones. King Theron ignored his men. His silver gaze never left Lysandra, who was still huddled against the wall, trembling like a frightened rabbit. He took in her ragged clothes, her thin frame, her stark white hair, and wide, terrified pink eyes. A strange, unreadable emotion crossed his face. "Gideon." The king's voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the very stones of the hut. "My clothes." The stern beta, Gideon, scrambled to obey, pulling a bundle from a pack and offering it with a bowed head. The king rose, his powerful form blocking out the light. He dressed with an economy of motion, never taking his eyes off her. Lysandra felt utterly exposed, stripped bare not by his nudity, but by the intensity of his stare. "I was ambushed," Theron stated, his voice now holding the clear, commanding tone of a ruler addressing his subjects. "Rogues, a dozen of them, their claws laced with silver nitrate. A cowardly attack in the blizzard." He gestured to the bloody rags on the floor. "She found me. She saved my life." Gideon's gaze flickered to Lysandra, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. He had clearly expected to find his king's killer, not a half-starved Omega girl. Theron took a step toward her. Lysandra flinched, pressing herself harder against the rock. He stopped, a flicker of pain crossing his features. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I will not harm you," he said, his voice softening, losing its regal edge and becoming something more personal, more intimate. It wrapped around her like a warm cloak. "You, who saved me when you had nothing. You, who tended my wounds when you were freezing yourself. You, who spoke your heart into the darkness, believing no one was listening." Lysandra's blood ran cold. He had been awake. He had heard her pathetic, tearful confession. The shame was so absolute, so suffocating she wished the ground would swallow her whole. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely a squeak. "I know," he said gently. He took another slow step, closing the distance between them until he was looming over her. He knelt, bringing his silver eyes level with hers. The power rolling off him was immense, yet it wasn't threatening. It was protective. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching a strand of her white hair. A jolt, like lightning, shot through her at his touch. It wasn't painful. It was a shock of pure, unadulterated energy. A connection. He stared at her, his expression one of profound wonder, of a man who had been searching for a millennium and had finally found what he was looking for. Then, he spoke the word that would shatter her broken world and rebuild it anew. Mate. The word hung in the air, a detonation of impossible hope. Lysandra stared at him, her mind refusing to process it. Mate. Him? The Alpha King? Her? The cursed Omega? It was a joke. A cruel, terrible joke. Laughter, thin and hysterical, bubbled up from her chest. No, she choked out, shaking her head frantically. No, that's not possible. It's a mistake. The moon goddess would never… She couldn't finish. The litany of her flaws rose in her throat, choking her. Broken, worthless, cursed, rejected. The moon goddess does not make mistakes. Theron's voice was firm, cutting through her rising panic. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by an unshakable certainty. I have waited over a century for my fated mate. I have felt the emptiness of the bond my entire life. When you touched me last night, when you poured your gentle spirit into healing me, the bond flared to life. It screamed your name. But you don't understand, she cried, tears of desperation streaming down her face. Look at me. I am an Omega. My wolf is weak, a pale imitation of a true wolf. I'm an albino, a genetic flaw. My own pack cast me out. My own family called me a disgrace. I am nothing. I will only taint you, tarnish your power. She finally said it all, laying her worthlessness at his feet like a rotten offering. She expected him to recoil, to see the truth of her words and rescind his claim. She expected the disgust she had seen in every other pair of eyes her whole life. Instead, he reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear. His touch was fire and solace all at once. You call yourself an Omega? Weak, he murmured, his silver eyes searching hers. I see a spirit with the strength to survive utter desolation. You call your wolf a pale imitation. I see a creature of pure moonlight, unique and ethereal. You call your albinism a flaw. I see a beauty so rare it steals the breath from my lungs. You call yourself nothing, but you were everything when I was dying in the snow. Every word was a balm on her wounded soul. He wasn't just refuting her claims, he was reforging them. He was taking the pieces of her that she hated most and declaring them treasures. Your pack did not cast away a flaw, he continued, his voice hardening with anger, not at her, but for her. They threw away a diamond because they were too foolish and blind to see its worth. Your compassion, your selflessness in the face of your own suffering, that is the heart of a true queen. It is the strength I have been searching for. Lysandra could only stare, speechless. The ice around her heart was beginning to crack, tiny fissures spreading as the impossible warmth of his words seeped in. Could it be true? Could her greatest shames actually be her greatest virtues? He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on his beta, Gideon, who was still kneeling, watching the scene with a stunned expression. Theron's voice regained its regal authority, booming in the confines of the small hut. Gideon, rise. The beta scrambled to his feet. You will see to it that she is treated with the utmost respect. Theron commanded, his eyes still locked on Lysandra. Prepare my chambers for her. Find the finest silks, the warmest furs. She will want for nothing. This is Lysandra. She is my mate. And she is your future queen. The finality of his declaration was absolute. Gideon's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his training took over. He bowed low, deeper than before. "Yes, Your Majesty." His voice was filled with a new, profound respect. He looked at Lysandra now not as a strange Omega, but as the chosen of his king. The world tilted on its axis. One moment she was a nameless outcast dying in the snow. The next, she was the proclaimed mate of the most powerful wolf alive. The shock was too much. The warmth, the hope, the terrifying reality of it all crashed over her in a tidal wave. Her vision swam, the edges turning dark, and she slumped forward into the unshakable strength of King Theron's arms. Waking up was a disorienting experience. For a moment she thought she was dead. The surface beneath her was impossibly soft, and the air was warm, scented with sandalwood and something that was uniquely, intoxicatingly Theron. She was not in her cold, damp hovel. She was in a bed so large it could have fit 10 of her. Silken sheets caressed her skin, and a heavy fur blanket was tucked around her. She sat up, her heart beginning to race. The room was vast, larger than the entire great hall of her old pack. A massive stone fireplace crackled merrily on one wall, casting a warm glow over rich tapestries and dark, polished wood furniture. A set of glass doors led to a balcony overlooking a snow-dusted mountain range. It was a king's chamber. His chamber. The events in the hut came rushing back. Mate. Queen. It felt like a dream. A beautiful and terrifying fantasy her desperate mind had concocted in its final moments. But the warmth of the room, the softness of the bed, it was all too real. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Lysandra froze, pulling the blankets up to her chin. "Come in," a voice called from the other side of the room. She turned to see Theron sitting in a large armchair near the fire, a book open in his lap. He hadn't been looking at her, giving her space. He was dressed in simple black trousers and a dark gray tunic, yet he still radiated an aura of immense authority. The door opened and a young maid entered, carrying a tray laden with food. She kept her eyes respectfully lowered. "Your breakfast, my queen," she murmured, placing the tray on a small table near the bed. The title made Lysandra flinch. The maid bowed and scurried out, closing the door softly behind her. The tray was filled with more food than Lysandra had seen in a year. There was steaming porridge with berries, fresh bread with honey, sliced meats, and fragrant tea. Her stomach growled, a painful, humiliating sound in the quiet room. "Please, eat," Theron said, his voice soft. He closed his book and set it aside, giving her his full attention. "You need your strength." Hesitantly, Lysandra shifted to the edge of the bed. She noticed for the first time that she was wearing a simple, clean nightgown of soft white cotton. Someone had washed the grime from her skin and hair while she was unconscious. She felt a flush of shame, but also a flicker of gratitude. She ate slowly at first, then with a hunger that shamed her. The food was ambrosia, each bite a burst of warmth and flavor that chased away the lingering cold inside her. Theron watched her, his silver eyes patient, his expression gentle. He did not speak, allowing her the dignity of sating her starvation without comment. When she was finished, she pushed the tray away, feeling more human than she had in years. But the fear remained, a coiled serpent in her belly. This was all a mistake. Any moment now, he would look at her properly, see the broken thing she was, and this dream would end. "This is overwhelming," she whispered, her gaze fixed on her hands which were twisting the silken sheet. "I know," he replied. "I do not expect you to simply accept this overnight. You have known a lifetime of cruelty. Trust is not easily given." He rose and walked to the glass doors, staring out at the mountains. "This is my sanctuary, my home. You are safe here, Lysandra. No one will harm you. No one will look upon you with anything but the respect you are owed." But they would, she thought. They would see her, the pale, weak Omega, and they would wonder why their mighty king had chosen such a flawed mate. They would whisper behind their hands, just as her old pack had. The setting had changed, but her own deficiencies had not. Over the next few days, Theron was true to his word. He was endlessly patient. He did not push her, did not demand she accept the bond or perform any duties. He simply existed beside her. He had a separate room prepared for her, connected to his by a private sitting area, giving her a space that was her own. He invited her to walk with him in the castle's vast, snow-covered gardens. He took her to the library, a magnificent two-story room filled with thousands of books, the scent of old paper and leather a comfort to her frayed nerves. He talked to her, telling her about his kingdom, his people, his duties. And he listened. He asked her about the plants she knew, the stories her mother had told her. He treated her not as a conquest or a symbol, but as a person. And slowly, terrifyingly, the ice around Lysandra's heart began to melt. The pull of the mate bond was a constant, warm hum beneath her skin, a feeling of safety and belonging she had craved her entire life. But the castle was not just Theron. It was filled with his court, his staff, his pack. While most followed Gideon's example, bowing respectfully and treating her like the queen she was supposed to be, not all eyes were kind. She felt them most acutely in the dining hall. Theron had insisted she join him for meals, and sitting at the high table next to him felt like being on a stage. She saw the sideways glances, the whispered comments. One noblewoman in particular, a stunningly beautiful she-wolf with fiery red hair and a predatory gaze named Cyrilda, made no effort to hide her disdain. "Such a delicate complexion," Cyrilda commented one evening, her voice loud enough for Lysandra to hear. "One hopes our queen has the fortitude for our harsh mountain sun. It can be so unforgiving to those not blessed with a strong constitution." Lysandra shrank in her seat, the familiar sting of shame making her skin prickle. Theron's fork clattered onto his plate. The hall fell silent, his silver eyes, cold as a winter storm, fixed on Cyrilda. "My mate's beauty is like the rare winter rose, Lady Cyrilda," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "It thrives in conditions that would cause more common blossoms to wither and die. I suggest you remember that." Cyrilda's face paled, and she immediately bowed her head. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I meant no offense." But her eyes, when she dared to glance at Lysandra again, were filled with venom. The head cook, a stout, sour-faced woman named Magra, was another source of subtle torment. Lysandra's meals would arrive lukewarm, or a dish she had expressed a liking for would suddenly be unavailable. They were small slights, petty cruelties that were impossible to prove, but they chipped away at her fragile, budding confidence. Each one was a whisper that said, "You don't belong here." She found herself retreating into the shell she had built over years of abuse. She would hide in her room or the library, avoiding the crowded halls. The fear was a constant companion. What if Theron grew tired of defending her? What if he finally saw what Cyrilda and Magra and all the others saw? What if this warmth was just a temporary reprieve before an even colder winter? One evening, she stood on her balcony staring at the moon. It was full and bright, casting the snow-covered peaks in an ethereal glow. The mate bond tugged at her, a silent call from Theron's room next door. It promised comfort, safety, an end to her loneliness, but she was too afraid to answer it. To accept the bond fully was to give him the power to destroy her. To be rejected once was agony. To be rejected by her true mate, after tasting this impossible hope, would be an oblivion from which she would never return. She wrapped her arms around herself, a familiar, lonely gesture. "I am not a queen," she thought, the words a painful refrain. "I am a ghost, a pale shadow haunting a king's palace. Sooner or later, the sun will rise, and I will fade away." The decision to trust, To truly believe she was worthy felt like a leap into a chasm, and she was terrified of the fall. The day the Northern Council delegation was announced, a knot of pure dread formed in Lysandra's stomach. Theron had explained that it was a routine diplomatic visit, a renewal of trade agreements and territorial pacts. He wanted her by his side in the throne room when he received them. "It is time they saw their queen," he had said, his voice gentle but firm. Lysandra had wanted to refuse, to hide in the library until they were gone. But she saw the hope in his eyes, the quiet belief in her strength. She could not disappoint him, so she allowed the handmaidens to dress her in a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that contrasted sharply with her white hair and adorned her with a simple silver circlet. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a pale, frightened girl playing dress-up. She walked into the great hall on Theron's arm, her hand trembling in the crook of his elbow. He squeezed it reassuringly. The hall was filled with his court, all dressed in their finest. The air was thick with anticipation. Lysandra kept her eyes fixed on the massive double doors at the far end of the hall, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The herald's voice boomed, announcing the delegation from the Northern Council, led by Lord Valerius of the Silver Moon Pack. The name struck Lysandra like a physical blow. Lord Valerius, her uncle, the architect of her misery. The blood drained from her face and her knees went weak. She stumbled, and only Theron's strong arm around her waist kept her from falling. "Breathe, Lysandra," he murmured in her ear, his voice a low growl. "I am here. He cannot harm you." But her body didn't believe him. It was locked in the primal terror of a prey animal spotting its lifelong predator. The doors swung open, and he strode in, flanked by other northern lords. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, proud, his face a mask of arrogant authority. His eyes swept the hall, taking in the power and wealth of the Shadow Wolf court. Lysandra instinctively tried to shrink behind Theron to make herself invisible. But it was too late. Valerius's gaze passed over the throne, over the king, and then it fell on her. For a moment there was no recognition. He saw only a woman with stark white hair standing beside the king. Then his eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion, followed by dawning, horrified disbelief. He stopped dead in the center of the hall, causing the lords behind him to bump into him. "Lysandra?" His voice was a harsh, incredulous whisper that carried in the sudden silence. He took a step forward, his face contorting into the familiar sneer she knew so well. "What is this? What is this filth doing in the king's palace? Has she bewitched you, your majesty? She is a servant, a curse." He started toward the dais, his hand outstretched as if to rip her from Theron's side. "Come here, you disgraceful wretch. You do not belong here. You belong in the dirt with the other Omegas." The entire court gasped. Cyrilda, Lysandra noticed from the corner of her eye, was smiling, a cruel, triumphant smirk. This was it. This was the moment everyone would see the truth. Her past had come to claim her. But before Valerius could take another step, before he could lay a single finger on her, Theron moved. He did not shout. He did not draw a weapon. He simply released her and took one step forward, and the temperature in the hall dropped by 20 degrees. "Lord Valerius," Theron's voice was unnervingly calm, but it held the deadly promise of a gathering storm. "You will halt. You will be silent. And you will address my mate with the respect she is due." "My mate." The words echoed in the cavernous hall. Valerius froze, his face a mask of utter shock. "Your mate? This pale, broken thing? Impossible. She is a worthless Omega from my own disgraced bloodline. I cast her out myself." "You cast away a diamond because you were too ignorant to see past the dust." Theron's voice was now laced with a terrifying fury. He did not raise it, but it seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. He unleashed his alpha aura, not just a hint of it, but a full, crushing wave of absolute power. It slammed into Lord Valerius like an invisible wall. The arrogant lord choked, his face turning purple. He clawed at his throat as if invisible hands were strangling him, and his knees buckled. He crashed to the stone floor, prostrate before the throne, gasping for air. The other northern lords took a terrified step back, their faces ashen. Theron descended the 2 steps from the dais, looming over the pathetic, groveling form of Lysandra's tormentor. "You call her broken?" Theron snarled, his silver eyes blazing with cold fire. "Let me tell you of this broken Omega. Weeks ago, I lay dying in a blizzard, poisoned by silver. Your northern patrols were nowhere to be found. My own guards were lost. I was alone, facing death." His voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. "And she found me, this worthless girl who had nothing, who was freezing and starving herself. She dragged my body, twice her size, to shelter. She used her last rags to clean my wounds. She gave me her warmth when she had none to spare. She saved the life of your king while you sat in your warm hall, counting your gold and preening about your noble line." He crouched down, grabbing a fistful of Valerius's fine tunic and hauling his head up. "She possesses more strength, more honor, and more nobility in her little finger than you and your entire bloodline have ever known. You are not a lord, you are a fool. A blind, arrogant fool who mistakes cruelty for strength and prejudice for wisdom." He threw Valerius back to the floor. "You are banished from my court. Your trade agreements are void. Consider yourself fortunate that I do not march to your pathetic pack and burn it to the ground for the insult you have paid my queen." Queen. He had called her his queen. Lysandra stood on the dais, watching it all unfold. And as Theron spoke each word of vindication, a crack appeared in the glacial wall around her heart. With every defense of her worth, the crack widened. With every ounce of his fury spent on her behalf, a piece of the ice shattered. When he called her his queen, the entire structure dissolved. It melted away in a sudden, overwhelming flood of emotion. The weight of years of shame, of worthlessness, of believing she was a curse, was lifted from her shoulders. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in her life, they were not tears of sorrow or pain. They were tears of relief, of release, of catharsis. Theron turned from the whimpering form of her uncle and ascended the steps back to her side. He ignored the stunned court, the terrified delegation. He had eyes only for her. He gently took her face in his hands, his expression softening as he looked at her tear-streaked face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice now filled with a deep, rumbling concern. Lysandra looked at him, at this magnificent, powerful king who had seen the worth in her that no one else had, who had not only saved her but had championed her, had fought for her honor when she had none of her own. The last of her fear, the last of her doubt, washed away in the tide of her tears. She saw him, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the hope he represented. She was ready to embrace it. In the profound silence of the great hall, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, Lysandra raised herself on her toes and did something she never thought she would have the courage to do. She kissed him. After the public humiliation of Lord Valerius, the great hall had emptied in a flurry of shocked whispers and hasty departures. The northern delegation, led by a pale and trembling second-in-command, had practically fled the castle. Theron had dismissed his own court with a single, sharp gesture, leaving him and Lysandra standing alone on the dais in the vast, silent room. Her kiss had been brief, a soft, tentative press of her lips against his. But in that single moment the world had shifted. The warm hum of the mate bond had roared to life, a supernova of light and energy igniting between them. When she pulled back, her face was flushed, her heart pounding with a wild, joyful rhythm. Theron stared down at her, his silver eyes wide with a raw, unguarded emotion. It was a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. He slowly raised a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the universe. Lysandra. He breathed her name. And it was a prayer. The last shard of her doubt, the final echo of Valerius's cruelty, dissolved into nothingness. The fear was gone. In its place was a certainty so profound it felt as though it had been forged in the heart of a star. This was right. This was her destiny. Not the one of rejection and misery she had been assigned, but the one the goddess had intended all along. I was so afraid, she confessed, her voice clear and steady for the first time. I was afraid that if I let myself believe this was real, it would be taken from me. That you would see what everyone else saw and cast me aside. I will never cast you aside, he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. You are the other half of my soul. To cast you aside would be to destroy myself. She looked into his eyes, the beautiful silver pools that had seen her, truly seen her, from the very beginning. She placed her hand over his, pressing his palm against her cheek. I'm not afraid anymore, she whispered. I choose this. I choose you, Theron. Her words, her declaration of agency were the final key. It was not just fate or a bond imposed upon her. It was her choice, her acceptance. A smile, the first genuine, soul-deep smile of his life, transformed his stern face, making him look younger, almost boyish. Relief and a joy so potent it was almost painful radiated from him. Then I will spend the rest of my very long life proving that your trust is not misplaced, my queen, he murmured. He lowered his head, and this time his kiss was not tentative, it was acclaiming. It was fire and lightning, a torrent of all the loneliness, the longing, the centuries of waiting poured into a single earth-shattering connection. Lysandra met his passion with her own, a lifetime of pent-up love and a desperate need to be cherished finally unleashed. It was not a kiss of seduction, but of homecoming. It was the two fractured halves of a single soul finally clicking back into place. Every broken piece of her was mended, every cold corner of her heart flooded with a brilliant, consuming warmth. The bond between them solidified, a tangible thing of light and power, weaving their spirits together for eternity. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. The world had been remade. The official mating ceremony was held a month later, under the light of a full moon on the grand balcony of the throne room. Lysandra stood beside Theron, not as a frightened Omega, but as his equal. She wore a gown of shimmering silver, the color of moonlight on snow, a color she no longer saw as a curse, but as a symbol of her unique spirit. Her white hair was woven with tiny diamonds that glittered like starlight. When she looked out at the assembled pack, at the lords and ladies of the Shadow Wolf territory, she saw no contempt. She saw only awe and reverence for their new queen. Her story had spread like wildfire, the tale of the outcast Omega whose compassion had saved their king. Her supposed weakness had been revealed as the kingdom's greatest blessing. She was no longer Lysandra the Broken, she was Lysandra, the moon-blessed queen. In the years that followed, she reigned at Theron's side not with an iron fist, but with an open heart. She never forgot the cold, the hunger, the sting of being an outcast. She used her power and influence to establish sanctuaries for the packless, the weak, and the rejected. She sought out those who, like her, had been deemed flawed, and she showed them that their differences were their strengths. Her compassion, the very thing that had caused her so much suffering, became the bedrock of a new era of peace and prosperity for the kingdom. Her journey had been one of unimaginable pain, a long, dark road of suffering and isolation. But she now understood that her rejection had not been an end. It had been a necessary, brutal detour that had led her out of the shadows of a pack that could not see her worth, and into the arms of a king who saw her as his entire world. Standing on the balcony on a cold winter's night, her hand held firmly in Theron's, she watched the snow fall gently over their peaceful kingdom. The cold no longer held any terror for her. It was just a reminder of the night she had found a fallen king in the snow, and in saving him, had finally saved herself. She was home. She was loved. She was whole.